Stuka Joe here, and we're about to start turn number 8, the next to last turn of this playthrough of Red Typhoon. And my niece found this on the floor. This is the 167th Infantry Division of the 2nd Panzer Army. It's taken a beating. I believe this must have disappeared at the beginning of the game somewhere, and obviously it hasn't been eliminated. So what we will do to not place the unit in the front lines and not give the Germans marked advantage, we will say that it's been held in reserve, and we will place it here in Bryansk, which would be a reasonable place to place such a unit in that army which is covering that side of the front. Things are not looking well for the Soviets here. They have the burden to push to the west, and their offensive has stalled. They have really been unfortunate in pushing the Germans back. The Germans have been falling back gradually, making the tasks of the Soviets harder by removing themselves from proximity of Soviet units. That means that Soviets have to spend activation points to move and then to attack. There's only 2 turns left, and one is left to wonder how much realistically can the Soviets achieve in terms of breakthroughs. Can they reach even one red victory point city? I don't think so. I think that the most realistic goals is to probably deny the Germans of victory points by occupying victory point cities in black. Remember, in this game, the Germans score victory points for holding 2 victory point cities in black, and the Soviets score victory points for occupying victory point cities in red. And in addition, we add victory points for casualties. So the closest victory point city in red for the Soviets is Spasdemensk, worth 2 victory points, but you see that the Soviets don't have a concentration of force which is significant there. The WL front practically has stretched itself thin. So let's begin turn number 8, and we begin with the Soviet activation point phase. Soviets receive 6 activation points this turn. Don't have any remaining from the previous turn, so they'll have to manage with 6. Now on to the Soviet movement phase. With 6 activation points, the Soviets, the most they can expect fronts or formations to be able to attack in this turn would be 3. So they would need 3 activation points to move each one of these 3 formations, and then 3 to attack with these 3 formations. By necessity, one of those formations will have to be the stretched out WL front, because they have the closest red victory point city in their sector of the front. We will also see the Soviet WR front continuing their attack towards the west, and also the Kalinin front. So we will probably see no movement or attacks by the northwest front, nor any movement or attacks by the Bryansk front. We see in the Kalinin front, Nelidovo is within striking distance. Olenino is not a victory point city. There's a red victory point city, Beli, but that's pretty far away. Just 2 turns left. And Vyazma appears within striking range if those 2 infantry units can be eliminated. So far they seem to be strong, and the Soviets don't have a significant number of breakthrough units in the area. So the Soviets spend their first activation point, activate the Kalinin front for movement. These are the positions of the Kalinin front units before movement. Here are the positions after movement. We will see strong attacks against this infantry division to the north of Nelidovo, and also against this other infantry division here. An additional attack will occur against this 86th Infantry Division of the 9th Army, and probably with the help of units of the WR front, we may see attacks against these two units of the 4th Panzer Army holding this river bend. So turning our attention now to the WR front, they've taken Gazhatsk recently and are poised to keep driving on to see if they can take Vyazma and deny the German of those 2 victory points. The Germans have in this front a total of 6 units stacked too high, also panzer divisions in this vicinity which could counterattack. And the second Soviet activation point is used to activate the WR front for movement. So let's take a look at the positions of the WR front before movement. Here are the positions after movement. They have advanced into contact with all the German units that are holding the front. Possible attacks could be here against these 2 German units, and the elimination or pushing back this group of German units is important, but the Soviets don't have strong units there at all, so that looks more like a 2-to-1 attack, not very promising. There's a possible attack against these panzer units here that may push them back. So let's see how those attacks which seem desperate will fare out. Having spent 2 of 6 activation points, the Soviets consider now moving the units of the WL front, but when you look at the forces they are facing, it doesn't appear that they can obtain any favorable odds on any significant number of units of the 4th Army and 2nd Panzer Army. Taking a look here at the units of the Northwest Front, they had moved previously into contact with units of the reserve formation, but had not been ordered to attack because of a shortage of activation points. They could move to get better odds against especially that unit in the north. And that may open a way to Kulm, which is 2 victory points for the Germans. So it would deprive the Germans of 2 victory points. Taking a look at the north part of the map, the Northwest Front had moved into contact previously, but not been ordered to attack because of a shortage of activation points. It seems that the victory point city of Kulm, which gives the Germans 2 victory points if they hold on to it, is reachable if they shift some forces to apply pressure on the German 281st Division. Turning our attention here to the WL Front's sector, we see that there's enough resources to conduct an attack against the Germans holding Yukhnov and probably deprive the Germans of 1 victory point. But there is not any possibility of actually taking much more than that. Spasdemensk seems pretty safe. That lone partisan unit would burn 1 activation point just to move, and then to attack Spasdemensk at very low odds, which is not feasible. So the dilemma is, do the Soviets activate the WL front to move their units in positions for attack, or the Northwest Front? Soviets spend their 3rd activation point to activate the WL front for movement. So the WL front it is. And these are the positions of their units before movement. And here are the positions after movement. We can see that they are very weak here in this sector of the front, concentrating more their forces on an attack here on the victory point city, which seems to be a 3-to-1 attack with a breakthrough unit. Now on to the Soviet combat phase. Spend their 4th activation point, activate the WL front for attack. We see the Soviet attack on Yukhnov, 25 to 8, 3-to-1 with a -1 because the defenders are in a city. This is a 3-to-1 attack with a -1 die roll modifier. We roll 1d6. What else is new? Another one. And this is an attacker retreat result. And the WL front's sole attack ends in fiasco. So we'd spend their 5th activation point to activate the WR front for attack. And here we see the best chance of the Soviets to create a breakthrough, surround and eliminate German units. These 2 stacks of Soviet units, 21 combat factors, attacking these 2 panzer divisions, defending with 7 combat factors, if successful. That means if a 1 is not rolled, probably. These German units will retreat. This hex will be occupied. And then this next attack, which is probably with luck at 2-1, but does not seem to be 2-1, may be carried out, and if a defender retreat is obtained, those 2 German divisions will be eliminated. However, if the Soviets attack with these 2 stacks, it'll be 1-1, 12-7. So the Soviets will have to borrow this 5-7 unit to attack together with these 2 stacks, so that this attack here will be 17-7, 2-1. So that means that this first initial attack will be 16-7 at 2-1. So it's 2 2-1 attacks, and one depends on the other for success. So the Soviets have to dislodge these German units from this hex in order to surround these other 2. We start with the attack on the 2 panzer divisions by the 8 in this hex, and the 2 units to the south, 16-7, 2-1, no modification. We roll 1d6. A 3 contact, not enough to move the Germans out of there. Now with the failure of the initial attack in gaining this hex here, we will proceed to resolve this attack to see if by any chance a breakthrough is achieved, meaning that this unit could move or advance 2 hexes into this hex, effectively surrounding these 2 units, so that then we can execute the 2-1 attack. The odds are 17-6. That is a very painful 2-1. The Soviets need at least a 5 or a 6 to push those units back. And finally, a 6 shows up in a Soviet attack. Defenders retreat 2 hexes. The defenders are retreated always by the attackers, and they're pushed 2 hexes back and disrupted. And now the Soviets advance. And now I notice that we attacked with that paratroop unit, which belongs to another formation. That means we have to burn another activation point, meaning Kalinin front will not be able to attack in this turn. We'll place the activation point in the attack box for the AP front, that is airborne and partisan. Continuing with this example, in addition to the 6-5 that occupied the vacated hex, ground breakthrough unit, the 4-8, also occupies the hex and can advance 1 more hex. And it advances adjacent to the 2 infantry divisions of the 4th Panzer Army, effectively surrounding them. Notice they are not isolated. They can trace a line of communications through these 2 panzer units and on to a supply source, but they are surrounded in the sense that if called to retreat, they will be eliminated. So now we resolve the attack by these 2 stacks of units and the 5-7, and that is a total of 17-7. A 2-1 attack with no modification, and the Soviets need a 5 or a 6. So it's a 2-1 attack, and we roll 1d6. The result is a 2, the dreaded AL, and that means that for the Soviets, they must eliminate 1 of their units, and all other units stay in place. So they will eliminate this 3-6 infantry unit. That's the end of that combat situation. Let's see further north of Vyazma. And we have 2 units of the WR front, I should say 2 stacks of units adjacent to 2 panzer divisions of the 4th Panzer Army. There's a total of 19 to 6, 3 to 1 attack with no modification. So we roll 1d6, and the roll is a 4, DR2. Defenders retreat 2 hexes through the woods and are disrupted. Meanwhile, the attackers occupy the vacated hex, and there are no more attacks by the WR front. No more attacks by any other Soviet unit. The units of the Kalinin front did not have enough activation points to attack. However, they are in place to attack next turn, unless, of course, the Germans fall back a couple of hexes, which will force them to burn some activation points. But Nelidovo is within striking distance, probably for the last turn. So the Soviets failed to deprive the Germans of any victory points during this turn. They failed to capture Yuknov, and it seems that the game is going to be a German victory unless something drastic happens. And this is the end of the Soviet combat. We ignore the next 3 phases, proceed to the Soviet recovery phase. Soviets have a unit to the southwest of Sukinichi, now in good order, and similarly, the units that participated in the failed attack against Yuknov are also flipped to their front sides. And this is the end of the Soviet turn for turn 8. And now we proceed to the German portion of turn 8. We start with the German activation point phase. Germans receive 6 activation points. Place them in the unused German activation point markers box. Germans are ready to go. Now on to the German movement phase. Germans have 2 units of the WL front surrounded in Kirov and to the south, so they may want to move some of their units of the 2nd Panzer Army or 4th Army to finish off these Soviet units. Also, the partisans to the north of Spasdemensk may be tended to. Meanwhile, in the 4th Panzer Army front, a small gap has developed here to the northeast of Vyazma, so that needs to be plugged, and the Germans have some dispersed units here that cannot move, so they will need to fall back with some other of their units. However, these 2 infantry divisions are surrounded, so the Germans may need to counterattack to free them up. In other sectors of the front, we see German disrupted units that will not be available here to do anything in this movement and combat phase. The 9th Army is hard pressed and may want to fall back to avoid or at least make more costly in terms of activation points the Soviets if they want to attack them. And the same thing applies to the reserve units that are holding the northern end of the line. Germans spend their first activation point to activate the 4th Army for movement. 4th Army is in a position here to finish off this unit and also to finish off the partisans to the north of Spasdemensk so that they can't be used, or their zones of control can't be used in the next turn. So these are the positions of the 4th Panzer Army units before movement, and here are the positions after movement. We see that the infantry division that was in Spasdemensk moved south in order to join against this attack here, against the unit of the WL front. That will probably be a joint attack with units of the 2nd Panzer Army. That unit, Soviet unit, is surrounded. Now, turning our attention to the sector of the 4th Panzer Army, we see that they have a unit or 2 units that are surrounded by enemy zones of control, and that will probably need a counterattack to move or displace this cavalry unit. This is a cavalry unit that is misprinted as an infantry unit. Second activation point used to move the units of the 4th Panzer Army. So here are the positions of the units of the 4th Panzer Army before movement, and here are the positions after movement. Notice that the line is not very strong here in this area, so the Germans will have to probably just activate the units of the reserve front just for this unit to be able to come to the aid and solidify that line. The Germans spend their third activation point, activate the units of their reserve formation for movement. We see a unit of that formation holding Roslav against partisans, which are in the vicinity. And further to the north, we see two units of that formation surrounding another partisan unit that was headed towards the victory point city of Velish. Now, looking at the situation in the WR front, we see the 246th Infantry Division, which will now move in to join the line held by the 4th Panzer Army. And further to the north, we see other units of that reserve formation, which are in contact with units of the Kalinin front, and they don't want to give the Soviets an opportunity to destroy or push back units, so they will probably be falling back. Here are the positions of those units after movement. Only the units, the division in Andreapol is still in contact with the Soviets, and also the 12th Infantry Division. Now the 9th Army is in disarray near Nelidovo, so they want to beef up that line and prevent their two forward units, the 86th and 102nd Infantry Divisions, from being surrounded. The 4th activation point is used to activate the 9th Army for movement. We see the positions of the units of the 9th Army before movement, and here are the positions after movement. Note that the 253rd Infantry Division is still holding out here to give some space to the German defenders of Nelidovo. The Germans only have 2 activation points left. They will probably need those to conduct counterattacks against the surrounded units of the WL front, and that would entail activating the 2nd Panzer Army or 4th Panzer Army or both, and also to eliminate some partisans, even though there's still also units of the reserve formation in place surrounding partisans. We move on to the German combat phase. The Germans also want to conduct an important attack here that will free up 2 of their infantry divisions here to the east of Vyazma. So that entails activating the the 4th Panzer Army. So that means that to save activation points, the Germans will probably have to attack only with panzer divisions here in this sector of the front, which entails the expenditure of no activation points. The Germans spend their 5th activation point to activate the 4th Panzer Army for attack. So the Germans really want to free up these 2 infantry divisions, not lose them, so they will attack with units from these 3 hexes, 13 combat factors against 4 defending Soviet factors, 3 to 1 attack, no modification. We roll 1d6. A 1 attacker retreat, so the Germans have to retreat their units and disrupt them. Germans have to retreat their attacking units 1 hex, and the problem is going to be with these 2 units which are surrounded by enemy zones of control. So these 2 units first retreat 1 hex and are disrupted. And these 2 German infantry divisions cannot retreat. They're surrounded by enemy zones of control, so they are eliminated. So what the Soviets could not achieve with an attack, they did achieve in defense. With those 2 eliminated units, there are now 21 eliminated German units. That is 4 victory points in eliminated units for the Soviets, 1 for every 5 eliminated enemy units. The Germans have no more attacks to make with their 4th Panzer Army, and they have 1 activation point left, and they will use it to activate the 4th Army. And the Germans' last activation point is used to activate the 4th Army for attack. And we resolve first the attack against the surrounded partisan unit to the north of Spasdemensk. It's a 3-to-1 attack. The defenders are isolated, so that's a +1 die roll modifier. 5 modified to a 6. Defender retreats 3 hexes. Defending unit is surrounded. It cannot retreat, so it is eliminated, and the victorious German units occupy the vacated hex. Next, we proceed to the attack against the surrounded Soviet armored unit at Kirov. The 4th Army has these 3 units, 9 combat factors attacking, and 2 panzer divisions joining. They don't need activation points to be activated. So that's 9 plus 6, 15 divided by 4. That is 3-to-1 with a -1 because the defenders are in city. So it's a 3-to-1 with a -1. We roll 1d6. 2 modified to a 1, contact. So all units remain where they are. And turning our attention to the other units of the 4th Army, there's only some units in proximity to a strong Soviet unit here, so the 4th Army will not be conducting any more attacks. Note that 2 panzer divisions of the 2nd Panzer Army, the 4th and 17th, have not attacked yet. They could conceivably attack this surrounded Soviet unit. This would be 7-to-4, 1-to-1, with a -1 for the river, but a +1 because the unit is isolated. And that attack would have a 1 in 3 chance of eliminating the unit with a retreat result. So do the Germans want to go for it? The answer is no, because if this panzer unit is called to retreat, it will be eliminated. So that's the end of the German combat phase. Now we proceed to the German recovery phase. We see that in the sector of the 4th Panzer Army, there are several disrupted units. Now they are flipped to their front sides. There are no additional German disrupted units. So that's the end of the recovery phase, the end of German turn 8, and the end of turn 8. And we've seen that the Soviets have failed to penetrate deeply behind the German lines. And it seems that the Soviets are in a tough bind here. And they are not in a position to take many victory points in the next turn. So we will abstain from counting the victory point tally right now. We will count those at the end of the next turn, which will be the last turn of this playthrough of Red Typhoon. So this is Stuka Joe signing off for now. Thanks for watching.